Hello, welcome back. It's me, Xpsupernova, and today I'm gonna be beating the Pizza Tower as the Vigilante. That's right, I'm not being Peppino today. Instead, I'm being the cheese slime that's the boss on the second floor. Now, originally, if you didn't know, the Vigilante was actually meant to be in the game, but he was removed later for reasons I don't really know. But with that out of the way, let's get straight into the challenge now, shall we? Now, the Vigilante can do a lot of things Peppino can. He can crawl, he can enter doors, he can run just like Peppino can, and he can even slide. Although, his running and sliding is a little weird because he actually can't really run through blocks unless he's going less than max speed. It's really weird. He also has his gun there that you just saw, and he can shoot through blocks. Generally, it's better to shoot through blocks for the most part, but you can also run through it at like lower speeds. It's really weird. But yeah, you can also climb walls just like Peppino, assuming you run into them, or you just shoot your gun into it a couple times and then it'll just kind of grab the wall. It's really weird and glitchy, but that's kind of what you would expect from an unimplemented character anyways. Now, the Vigilante can't slide through blocks if he's not going at max speed before he slides. It's kind of weird, but that's just kind of how it is as well. There's all sorts of weird glitchy stuff with the Vigilante, and I would in general not recommend sliding through blocks at all because that's just very dangerous and you can end up soft locking yourself if you roll under there. So do be careful about that. It's something that's present throughout the entire challenge and it can be very dangerous. Also, no matter what speed the Vigilante runs, he cannot break through metal blocks, but luckily he does have dynamite, which I can use the A button in this case to throw some dynamite and break these blocks. It's pretty useful honestly, and we use it all throughout the challenge. Also, even though these blocks look like they're normal target blocks, we actually can't shoot through them. So instead, we have to kind of just use the weird glitchy grab mechanic. It's not really a mechanic, it's more of a glitch than anything, but I will be using it if I absolutely have to get through, but in general, I'm going to try not to use it. But with that all explained and out of the way, let's move straight into the challenge now, shall we? John Gutter honestly starts out pretty simple, and there's not a whole lot to talk about. For the most part, at least in the beginning half. You just kind of do what you normally do, you shoot through the blocks that you need to, and you throw dynamite at the metal blocks, and it's generally pretty easy for the most part here. Now you might notice a little number in the top left corner that happens to not be the combo meter, and that's actually the Vigilante's health bar, which we have to be careful of, but in general it's not too much of an issue outside of boss fights. It also happens to increase whenever we grab little toppings or big toppings. Little toppings increase it by 1, and big toppings increase it by 10. Anyways, now back onto the level. All you gotta do to get over here is just to bounce on this guy, or just do like a weird uppercut shot, come to think of it, but in general it's not too much of an issue, but it can take a couple attempts to bounce this guy into the right place, because it's a little finicky when you can only bounce on top of him and not grab him. I'm in general not trying to grab if I don't have to, but sometimes it can cause little things like this to happen. And also, it's a little tricky to actually get into this box, but it's not too bad, honestly, all things aside. But yeah, with that out of the way, John Gutter really isn't that much of an issue aside from that small little problem spot, which is kinda nice come to think of it, but it's not too bad. Also, I don't know if this is a mod or not, but the mod uses the noises victory screens. I don't know what causes that, but it's kinda fun that we get to see that instead of the normal Peppino victory screens anyway. Pizza Escape, fortunately enough, really isn't that difficult, honestly, besides maybe avoiding damage here and there. But you do need to watch out for a lot of places you can soft lock yourself, because if you roll into blocks and you're not running at full max speed, you won't break them, and then you can just get infinitely rolling into a wall, and there's nothing you can do to get out of that. You can throw dynamite at rats to kill them, by the way, so that's the only way we really get through them for the most part, unless we glitchily transform. And also, we do take damage from pepperoni goblins if we get kicked by them, so we do need to be wary about that. A lot of things that you wouldn't think would give you damage actually do damage you, and that's just kind of unfortunate. And also, in general, this level really isn't too bad. Right here, it can be a little annoying if you just kind of glitchily grab into a block, because you can't break it by doing that. But you can, in general, just walk here and shoot through to get past here. Besides learning the movement of the Vigilante, Pizza Escape really isn't that bad, all things considered. And learning the movement really is the biggest challenge in this challenge. But yeah, with that all out of the way, let's move on to the next level. Ancient Cheese is a level that's all about using your dynamite effectively and avoiding soft locks if you can, because there's quite a few different places that are pretty tricky to avoid soft locks if you're not careful. Right here, what I decided to do was to actually throw my dynamite at the rat instead of just using that bomb, because it was just kind of easier, and also I didn't want to really use the glitchy grab because I tried to avoid that as much as I can. There are some places where I do need to use it, but for the most part, in most regular levels, you don't actually have to worry about that too much. This segment right here can also be pretty tricky because you can actually get soft locked here very easily if you're not careful. Because if that fortnite hits you or if you roll at the wrong time, you can just get stuck in a rolling animation continuously. It's one of those many spots that you can get just soft locked in if you're not careful, so you do need to be aware of that. Right here, what you need to do is you need to time your dynamite and throw it and blow it up right at that rat. It's not too tricky to get the timing down, but it is tricky on your first attempt, obviously, because you're learning how to use the Vigilante, and it can be a little tricky sometimes. And also right here, you can time the dynamite as well on top of the rat, but generally it's just easier to go under and throw it and blow it up. And the same can be said for most of the rats in this level as well. So be kinda careful, and it shouldn't be too difficult to actually blow them up. Right here, just spam shoot into the wall to grab onto it, and then once you get up here, what I would actually recommend doing is actually spacing yourself a little bit further from the rat and actually throwing your dynamite instead of just doing whatever the heck I'm doing right here, because it's just easier just to throw it from the side and blow it up. But in general, it's not too bad, honestly. The same can also be said for this little segment right here, where you just spam shoot into the wall again to actually grab it. But otherwise, yeah, Ancient Cheese isn't that bad, all things considered, so let's move on to the next level. Blood Sauce Dungeon is a level that's generally pretty fun to keep your speed in, and honestly kinda difficult sometimes because of the blocks, but as long as you slide into them at full mach speed, you can actually break them without stopping. Also, interestingly here, I technically actually will get the achievement here for the game, because the game doesn't actually know that I touched the lava, weirdly enough, because the Vigilante never transformed into the fire butt animation, so that's just kinda how it works there. In this segment right here, it's actually easier to keep a continuous run here than to start a run in any of these given segments, because the Vigilante is very slow at starting his run and going to full mach speed, because he generally can't do a grab dash like Peppino to gain some speed in small spaces. In general, however, it is much safer to not actually do a mach run, because if you accidentally stop or slow down in any of these spaces, you can actually get stuck and just continuously roll into the blocks, so you do need to be careful about that. The biggest issue in Blood Sauce Dungeon is actually just avoiding damage in general, because there's a lot of places that you can mess up and take damage, especially the lava, which generally actually doesn't damage you, but here it actually does, so you do need to be careful about that in general. Your gun is also pretty useful for not trying to take damage, because it can take out enemies from a range, so using that effectively as well is also key to success in Blood Sauce Dungeon. In general, Blood Sauce Dungeon is the first level that actually becomes kinda difficult to avoid damage if you're not careful, but in general, it's not too bad, honestly. So let's move on to Pepperman. Pepperman is by far the easiest boss fight in the entire challenge. There's not even any attacks that can really hit us for the most part, as long as we're being careful. You can literally just jump over its attacks and shoot him from the other side of the map, and he can't really do anything at all. There are some things to note, like, for example, we actually can only take 4 hits before we die. We can't heal any of our health at all, even if we take the little hats, because that doesn't work here. We only have 4 HP, even though it's not shown. So we do need to be very careful about that. But otherwise, yeah, Pepperman is very easy, but there are some things to note here. Like, for example, for his statue phase, we actually need to spam grab into the blocks there. I don't know what to call them, but the statues that we carve. You just gotta grab a bunch of times into that, because you can't actually damage him otherwise. And for the final hit in between phases and the final hit for the boss in general, you have to actually ground pound him so he actually takes damage. But that's just usually how it works here, because the Vigilante is not actually meant to defeat the bosses for the most part. So that's just kinda how it works. The second phase of the boss fight isn't even that much more difficult, but it is a tiny bit more difficult to jump over those statues, since it's not exactly easy to uppercut over them, since we don't really have access to that. The 4-hit limit is probably the biggest issue in any of the boss fights, but in general, Pepperman isn't too bad, and the only other difficult part, honestly, is just kinda hitting him at the very end. But otherwise, yeah, there's not much else to talk about here, so let's move on to the next world. It unfortunately turns out that Oregano Desert and Wasteland are actually impossible, because you actually can't use the fire transformation right here to get through those TNT blocks. There's no actual way to break those TNT blocks without the fire transformation, so that just kinda sucks, unfortunately. And the same is said for Wasteland, where you actually can't transform into a ghost to get through the cheese grates, unfortunately. There really isn't much we can do, but I'm going to be continuing this challenge anyways, because there's still a lot of interesting stuff coming ahead, and every other level besides those two are actually possible. The reason I decided to do Oregano Desert instead of Wasteland is because it kinda makes sense that the Vigilante could blow up TNT with TNT. But that's just kinda how it works sometimes. But anyways, let's move on to Fun Farm. Fun Farm is actually one of the very few levels in the game that actually has transformations that are fully animated for the Vigilante. Admittedly, it is the ladder animation, which the Vigilante already has by default, but it's still kinda interesting that there is an animation for some of the transformations anyways. The Vigilante actually does not need to use more at all to beat the level, because here's the thing, he can just blow up the rats on his own, and he can go over pits that are wider than anything Peppino could go over. And that's because he can kind of just float in the air by shooting a bunch of times. It's kind of weird, and it's kind of inconsistent, because if you shoot too quickly, you'll actually just grab and then you'll fall into the pit. But in general, it's not too difficult to do that, all things aside. In order to get past this potato thing, we actually need to do an uppercut shot, which has the same inputs as a regular uppercut, but instead the Vigilante just kind of jumps up higher than he normally would with his gun. It's kind of weird, but it is kind of useful in some places, and can actually give us infinite height if we use it correctly, although it is very difficult to do so. While the floating air shot is pretty useful in some situations, in general it doesn't have that many uses because it's kind of hard to pull off and it really doesn't give you much horizontal velocity, and it's quite easy to mess up as well. Luckily, also right here, we can just jump straight on through there. It is kind of precise to actually position yourself, but it's not too bad, honestly. The only genuinely difficult part of Fun Farm is actually this part right here, where we have to shoot at a rhythm in order to stay in the air long enough, and then we have to spam at the wall once we get to it. Overall, Fun Farm really isn't that difficult, all things aside, so let's move on to the next level. Fast Food Saloon starts off with this little tricky segment where we can jump off the wall and precisely shoot our way up there, but I decided to instead do the infinite height trick with the uppercut shots. And as you can see, it's kind of inconsistent and not exactly the easiest thing to pull off, but when we do pull it off, it is pretty useful most of the time. There's not many places where you need to do that, but in general, it is a useful thing to know to do. Unfortunately here for the smug horse that thinks he can win, the Vigilante is still able to go faster than him, and he is slower than Peppino, so maybe that horse should be kind of disappointed in himself, not gonna lie. But also, a lot about Fast Food Saloon is about going fast and making sure you keep your speed and momentum through, because you need to get through these timer segments pretty quickly, honestly. Unfortunately, however, the Vigilante actually is not fast enough to go through these time gates right here without using this weenie mount here, but luckily we have the weenie mount and we can actually use it surprisingly enough, so we do use that to our advantage. Also, interestingly enough, the weenie mounts are the only way the Vigilante can actually go as fast as Peppino's Mach 4, because if the weenie mount is going at full speed and he jumps off of it, he can actually go Mach 4 surprisingly enough, although he still can't run through blocks and the such. Fast Food Saloon is one of the most smooth flowing levels for the Vigilante, surprisingly enough, because he can actually keep his Mach speed for the most part. Obviously, he can't really speed up very quickly, but he can keep his momentum in this level pretty well compared to other levels. And also, we do need to use the weenie mount again here, just like Peppino would, to get through here as well. But that's just kind of how these weenie mounts work and how you need to use them, unfortunately. I would like to mention that this specific block has actually gotten me soft locked many times before because I wasn't at full Mach speed and I just ended up rolling there continuously. There is a soft lock I'll show you later, but in general I actually surprisingly avoided it for this run, surprisingly enough. Overall, Fast Food Saloon really isn't that difficult, all things aside, so let's move on to the next level. The Vigilante ends up being a really weird boss fight because here's the thing, we don't fight the Vigilante as the Vigilante and instead we have to use this gun. But here's the thing with this gun, it's kind of weird in that if I actually shoot it and then I just don't immediately hold the shoot button, I will just kind of glitch the heck out. This is by far the glitchiest fight in the run, and it's a little bit more tricky because you have to just hold it the entire time, so you only shoot at specific intervals at the Vigilante. It makes it a bit trickier, but overall it plays out pretty much the same, but sometimes it can be pretty tricky to time your shots at the Vigilante at times. Especially with attacks like those, where you have to just jump straight on over it. This was also really difficult my first time going through as well, but I mean, I usually don't record my first times through, but that's just kind of how it is. But anyways, there really isn't too much to talk about for the Vigilante, it is pretty much the same. But also, one last thing I would like to mention is these ghosts are pretty dangerous for the most part. But anyways, with that all out of the way, let's move on to the next world. And anyways, on to Gnome Forest, which has nothing to talk about for Vigilante's segment. And instead, I'm just going to mention that if you're as the Vigilante and you transform it into Gustavo and Brick, they actually can't break through blocks by running through as well. It's kind of just a glitch, but I'm just going to be allowing them to complete the level anyways, so there really isn't anything to talk about here, so we can kind of just move on to the next level. Crust Cove is the first level where things start to get a little bit difficult because it's actually getting harder and harder to not take damage if you're not careful. Especially in these beginning parts here where you have to dodge these spit cheeses, which can actually kill you. Keep in mind, you only have a limited amount of HP, so you have to be careful about it. And the only way to increase it is pizza points, as I've said before. This top-in is probably the trickiest top-in to get in the run because you have to run and shoot at the same time, but you have to time your shots so that way you don't actually hit the piranhas. You can always go back through, but it's generally a bit tricky to actually go through here, honestly. If it weren't for the fact that I was running at full Mach speed here, I actually would have got soft locked there and continuously spun. Because if you run into a block at slow speed like this, you can just kind of just roll infinitely into a block. And if you're under something, you actually can't get out of the animation, unfortunately. So that is something you always have to watch out for. And you can also blow these rats up with dynamite as well, so we don't actually have to use the barrels if we don't want to. And it's always a nice option to have different variety in our gameplay, especially compared to Peppino at times. There's also a slightly tricky slide right here as well, so you do need to be careful about that. You don't actually have to do that, you could just shoot under there, but it's generally a lot faster and more satisfying to just slide on through there, honestly. There is also a neat little trick right here that you can just shoot on over this, and you can actually see the pizza guy before you actually are in lap 2. That's always a kind of interesting thing you can do, because in general we can sometimes cheese these levels in unexpected ways. I know it's a terrible pun, but we gotta have some terrible puns here, honestly. In fact, we technically don't even need the barrel for this part right here, as we can just kind of just run straight on over. And instead of just using the barrel to kill the rat, we can just blow it straight on up. One last little thing I'd like to mention about this level is the fact that we actually can't use these spring boxes right here at all, because we'll just end up doing this. Because you actually transform whenever you're on those boxes, and we can't really use that transformation. But with that all out of the way, let's move on to the next level. Anyways, just before we actually get into golf, I'd like to show the soft lock thing, because this is exactly what happens when you get soft locked. It can get kind of annoying, and it does happen a couple times, unfortunately. But anyways, for this first segment here, all you gotta do is just run straight on through here, honestly, just like you normally would. There really isn't much to mention in the first two rooms. The only really difficult part in this room is trying to align your jump with your run into the ball right here. It's a little bit tricky, it's not too bad, honestly. But overall, it's not too much worse than what you would normally do as Peppino, only this time you're at Mach 2 instead of Mach 4. The fry course also plays out pretty much exactly the same as it normally does, but however, at the very end, what you want to do is you actually want to run straight back here. I also mess up right here trying to grab the top end, but that's beside the point. Just go straight on back instead of going over through there, because it's kind of annoying to actually jump up and get into the little gap there. It's generally much easier just to run straight on back. Also, in order to get on through this little gap right here, all you gotta do is just crouch and then jump in there. It's not too bad, and honestly, it's probably the easiest course out of the three. The Soda's course here starts off pretty simple with just a run it straight into this ball. But then, right here, what you need to do is you need to try to position the ball and get it down there. And generally, the easiest way to do that is just to jump on the ball. I don't know why I just followed the ball and then jumped on it at the very last second, but maybe I wanted to save some strokes here and there, I don't know. Then, after just a little bit of waiting, we juggle the ball straight on over here and then run back over here to get full Mach speed, and then we turn around into the ball, so that way we can just hit it right on over. It takes a little bit of juggling to get it over, but it's overall not too bad to get it through. Then all you gotta do after a couple Mach runs is start a small Mach run right over there, and he'll go straight into the goal. And with that, the Soda course is completed. Anyways, now on to the bird course, and interestingly enough, we actually can't blow up these small pin rats with the dynamite here, so instead we have to roll straight on through them. There's not really any reason we have to roll on through them, but I just wanted to make sure that I didn't get soft locked here in accident, because that can't happen anywhere, especially with small gaps like this. The only real tricky part here, and it is a pretty tricky part, mind you, is actually just getting this ball over this little gap right here. And the best way to do that is either to juggle him over here like this, which I kind of failed because it's very hard to juggle the ball at times, or alternatively, you can just launch him off from the platform on the right over there. So after waiting just a little bit and getting into just the right position, all we gotta do is just run straight on through to the ball and he'll get straight over the goal. Then it's almost over, but all we gotta do is just hit him a couple more times and it should be a-okay. All you really have to do in the final course is just align your shots and you should be a-okay and good to go. Now for this course right here, what you need to do is you actually need to shoot these guys and make sure they're out of the way, which I kind of struggled to do for a second, but it's not too bad honestly, I'm just kind of messing up here. We all make mistakes sometimes. But after that, all you gotta do is just get the ball right over here, and then just do the grab glitch right here onto the ball, hit him to the left, and you should be good to go. Then for this last hole right here, I just jumped onto the ball a bunch of times, went back, got full Mach speed, ran into the ball, and just ran through it like normal. And with that out of the way, the escape sequence really isn't that difficult after this, so let's move on to the next level. Anyways, in Deep Dish 9, we're lucky enough to be able to actually use both of the transformations kinda normally. Admittedly, we can't actually go through those blocks, which I think is just kinda built into the Vigilante's code at this point, that he can't run through blocks. But there's always that weird kind of thing. But we can use both of the transformations here to our advantage, which is always kind of a nice thing. Then once we get up here, there's a little trick that we can do where we actually just run and then just jump a bunch of times to keep our velocity slow, and we can just run straight on through those blocks. It's a little bit faster, but not really. We could also have just shot through there. But that just felt more swag, honestly. There's also a fun little trick right here we can do where we can just jump off of this and then shoot a couple times to make sure we're like on the boulder, and then we can just climb up it and then just shoot straight on over. It's kind of just a fun little trick we can do. It's not really practical, but it is kind of fun that the Vigilante can get over this gap completely without the rocket at all if he wanted to. We can also get over this without the olive by just uppercut it, shotting into a couple extra right shots. It's just kind of for fun for the most part, but that's how a lot of things in this level go, so that's just kind of how it is. Also, take that, Pickle, for ruining my first ever Pickle % run. You made it illegitimate because I didn't even know you existed. How could you? But yeah, for the most part, Deep Dish 9 really is a pretty simple level. But with that all out of the way, let's move on to the next level, I suppose. The Noise is actually a pretty tricky boss fight, honestly, because you really can't use a grab dash to actually gain yourself horizontal speed pretty quickly. The general idea with the Noise is actually just to stay grounded and walk under most of his attacks if you can. There are some you have to jump over, but in general, you can stay grounded for the most part, actually. Fortunately enough, however, even though some of these attacks are pretty tricky to dodge, you can actually stay a distance from the Noise, so that actually gives you a big advantage sometimes, because you can just straight up stay away from the Noise if you need to keep yourself away, whereas Peppino would have to get up close and personal to actually hit him before he gets out of his stun animation. Honestly, all things aside, the strategy is pretty much the same though, for the most part. You can get up close and personal if you want to, but generally it is a better idea to stay away from the Noise, but yeah, there is that. However, for his final phase attack, like most other bosses, you actually have to ground pound him. And it can end up being pretty tricky to do that sometimes if you're not careful, but luckily it's not too bad for the most part. Just be kinda careful for the first phase and you should be able to do a special cheese in the second phase actually. But it's all down to luck whether you get it or not, early or late. What you want to look out for is actually the balloon attack. All the other attacks are actually quite a bit more difficult to dodge now that you can't actually really uppercut. The uppercut shot is useful, but it isn't really maneuverable for the most part, because once you do it, you are just going to go straight up and then straight back down. So you do need to be careful about that, and generally want to stay a distance from the Noise, if you can. But here, with this balloon attack actually, you can just cheese him by just straight up shooting him from a distance, and he'll just take damage and die at the very end. So you can try and just stand away, and then just shoot away, and he can't really do anything at all. Then just get close to him for the final attack, because you can't shoot him for his final attack. Ground pound him, and you should be a-okay to go. But with that out of the way, let's move on to the fourth world. Starting off in oh shit, we can straight up just skip every single cheese transformation, because obviously we're cheese, and totally not like we can just blow up the rats that would be in the way normally. But anyway, this part right here is a little tricky to actually avoid all the bananas, because they're generally pretty well put in the way, so just be kinda careful about them and you should be fine. And if you fall off, you don't take any damage, so don't worry about that too much. We can also skip the cheese transformation right here as well, and it's honestly pretty simple. All we gotta do is just throw 2 bombs there, time them a little well, and we should be good to go. These ninjas also are probably the hardest enemy to avoid in the game, at least in my opinion, so do watch out for them and be careful about them as well. We can also do lid skip without the lid right here, which is always kind of a nice thing, but do keep in mind that these enemies right here are actually pretty tricky to dodge. And do not ground pound right here because the ninja will hit you before you can actually hit him, so be careful about that as well. You can also just skip this right here by throwing another bomb, and you should be good to go. There's also one last little skip you can do right here, but it's not too bad honestly. All you gotta do is just climb up the wall, throw a bomb down, and you should be good to go. You also might be able to skip that right there by doing a well-timed shot, but I'm not exactly sure if that's possible or not, and it's not really that important either. And besides some swag movement right here, there really isn't that much to talk about in oh shit, so we can move on to the next level. And also, what the heck was going on there? I have no clue honestly. Peppy Bot Factory is honestly one of the most difficult levels to avoid damage in the game, aside from Pizza Scare, so do be careful about taking too much damage, because you can die if you're not careful. Right here, what you want to do is you want to do an uppercut shot into a normal shot, so that way you can climb straight onto the wall. Then right here, what you want to do is you want to be able to grab onto this wall and be able to jump straight on off it to the other side of that wall, so that way you can climb straight on up. Then, all you gotta do to get up here is just do another uppercut shot into the wall and then grab it. It's overall not too hard to do those, but it can be a little bit tricky on your first attempt to do those because it's not exactly easy to learn the timing of these kind of things. Also, right here, make sure to shoot this guy as quickly as you can so that way you don't take any damage at all, because it is kind of dangerous to be there as well. Also, right here, we kind of get a funny running animation as well for the Vigilante because, I don't know, he's super glitchy and he kind of does this kind of thing. But right here is also a pretty dangerous part as well, so just kind of dodge these guys or just shoot them, or even just run into them, whichever way you prefer to take them out, honestly. Once you get into pizza time, the trickiest part is actually getting past these panel platforms, because you actually don't run as fast as Peppino, and you can't use a grab dash to actually get over them. But luckily, however, you can actually just shoot over them if you're just careful enough. I didn't think to do that at the time, but it is a very good way to just get over annoying things like that, fortunately enough. Especially use the shooting trick right here, because it's just much easier than just running straight on through here as well, just as a side note for you guys. Then just be kind of careful about these guys right here, make sure to try to dodge them if you can. Just shoot them all down before you go down to your next layer and you should be good to go. But with that out of the way, the escape is pretty easy for the most part, and we can move on to the next level. All you need to do to get the top end right here is just run straight on through the pig cup like you normally would. And then just throw a bomb to break that metal block and you should be good to go. I would also like to mention that these pig cups are actually completely immune to your gun and explosives, so do keep that in mind. So you can't just like bomb them from a distance to get through there. You just gotta throw your bombs where you need to break the metal blocks and you should be good for the most part. Through the pig cups anyways. There really isn't all that much to say about the pig city to be honest, but Gustavo can actually get through here normally without having to go back to Peppino to make him get fixed. So otherwise, with that all out of the way, let's move on to the next level. Surprisingly enough, Refrigerator Freezerator really has almost nothing to talk about. I mean, it's played exactly the same as Peppino, but instead of like running through blocks, you either slide through them if they're not metal blocks, or you throw a dynamite if they're a metal block. And I'm genuinely serious when I say that. There is literally nothing that is really different at all, except for one small little part right here. The only real notable difference here, besides obviously you being able to take out these snowmen from a range, is actually it's just a tiny bit tricky to actually get up here, up to this next floor right here. But overall, it is really not that bad, honestly. Refrigerator Freezer is probably the least changed level in the entire game. But with that all out of the way, let's move on to the next level. Fake Peppino is by far the hardest boss fight in this entire challenge, and it's not even close, honestly. Or that's what I would have said if it weren't for the fact that I actually discovered a way to make him much easier to fight, and I thought I had to like actually just straight on run into him, and instead I could have just ground pounded the entire time. So I kind of just paused here for a second because I was like, wait, I could have been doing this instead of just running around him the entire time? Cause yeah, that was what I did the entire time, and it made the fight an absolute nightmare. Luckily I discovered this and it made it much easier, but it's still nowhere near an easy fight. The fight is still very difficult, however, as you don't have access to an uppercut, which would be an extra double jump that you would have, but we don't have that here, so we still have to be very careful when we're jumping. We can still use a ground pound to stall in the air for a slight amount of time, but in general, you have to be very careful with what you do. And keep in mind, you can only take 4 hits, and that makes it very, very difficult. This fight is also pretty bad because we can't actually use our gun to hit him from a distance, which is our normal way of damaging bosses for the most part if we can. But since we have to get up close and personal, it's not exactly easy to get out of a sticky situation, especially since we don't have access to a grab dash. And that is a huge loss, especially right here in this fight. It wouldn't be as bad of an issue if we could actually shoot him, but we can't really do that, so we just have to be careful about that, honestly. We can shoot him while he is vulnerable like that, but otherwise, yeah, we have to be very careful, honestly. This duo of attacks in particular is actually very, very hard to dodge if you're not careful, because these guys are always in the way and you can't really gain a mock run, which is what I normally try to do, but it's still annoying to try to hit him while there's a bunch of enemies in the way and you have to keep constantly moving while you're trying to dodge both Fake Peppino and his clones. But then after that one, you have to avoid another attack where there's 2 heads being thrown at you, which is honestly not as bad, but it's still very difficult to dodge if you're not careful. And luckily, I somehow got this fight first try, and I don't even know how, honestly. But yeah, with that out of the way, the escape for Fake Peppino is honestly just as easy as it would be for Peppino. So let's move on to the next world. Pizza Scare by far is the worst level for softlocks in general. It's not normally too hard to dodge softlocks, but there's some softlocks in Pizza Scare where you actually have to go out of your way to dodge them, because they're not exactly normal ones. This one's a little annoying, but in general you can avoid those types of ones. But there are some that are actually way worse, that are not exactly easy to dodge. This first part with King Ghost is honestly pretty satisfying to go through without stopping. And honestly, it's not too bad, honestly. A lot of the level flows pretty well, even with the Vigilante and his weird block physics. This part right here is also soft-locked me many times because I have the instinct to always run there for some reason. But then again, that's kind of what you normally do in Pizza Tower. You always try to run and stay fast, and you just gotta kind of break your instincts right there. But luckily right here, you can also just completely skip this little segment and just go through by blowing up that big pin rat. However, in this segment, you want to actually keep running and you do not want to lose your velocity because otherwise you'll get hit by King Ghost and you do not want to take any damage if you can help it because any amount of damage is always bad damage. But luckily over here, we can actually just completely skip this small segment down there and all we gotta do is just use our gun to our advantage. Sometimes the Vigilante can do skips that Peppino can, just much quicker, honestly. Although in general, he is a lot slower than Peppino for the most part. This part right here is probably the most difficult part to avoid soft blocks. And what you need to do is you need to throw bombs down and then time and blow them up when you need to so that you can go down. because you need to time those bombs to make sure you can break these skull blocks. And then when you break this last skull block right here, you need to time it and then move right immediately so you don't actually get caught by that guy. Because if you get picked by him, you are just going to get stuck there and soft blocked forever, and that is never a good thing. They are always kind of annoying, but in general, avoiding them is not too bad. But that one in particular is actually pretty darn hard to avoid, unfortunately enough. But other than those few segments, Pizza Scare really is just about avoiding damage if you can. So with that all out of the way, let's move on to the next level. Don't Make a Sound, while it's not a very difficult level in this challenge, is honestly one of my favorites because you can do some pretty fun stuff in this level, honestly. I mean, first of all, you can just straight up shoot all the little sentries and you can just kind of get away and not even get caught at all. And you can even shoot the top-end monsters before they're even active. That's just kind of fun, honestly. You can just straight up get your revenge after how many times they might or might have not caught you, honestly. Who cares, honestly? It's kind of just fun to shoot the top-end monsters anyways before pizza time. The trickiest part of this level, honestly, is just avoiding those little electric blocks right there. They're not too bad, honestly, but you do need to be kind of careful because you do still have less mobility than Peppino, as I've said many times before. But in general, yeah, it's just really fun to shoot the top-end monsters if you can. And just shoot the patroller from a distance if you need to. Yeah, because you are not going to be caught by them at all. And if you do activate it, you can just shoot them if you haven't done it before. That's just kind of how it is, and it's generally pretty fun to do it, honestly. Honestly, why not just enjoy some of these clips of me just shooting the top-end monsters before pizza time? Because, I mean, what else am I supposed to do here? There really isn't much parkour or anything that we really need to do here that's particularly tricky. There are a couple of small parts. But otherwise, I guess just enjoy, I suppose. Anyways, we do actually need to grab this gun right here because we actually can't get through here without the gun. Because surprisingly enough, the Vigilante cannot shoot straight on down. And that's just kind of how it works for the Vigilante, unfortunately enough. But yeah, with that shooting montage done and out of the way, pizza time really isn't that much different than it normally would be. So let's move on to the next level. In War, we actually only need this gun for one shot in the entire map, which is kind of funny come to think of it, because the Vigilante already has his own gun, but there is one place we actually need to shoot straight on down in order to actually get on through. But otherwise, yeah, we don't actually need the shotgun at all for the entire level, surprisingly enough. But yeah, War is also one of those levels that's pretty tricky to avoid taking any damage of the sorts, but luckily it's kind of just a pretty straightforward level for the most part anyways. However, the time limit is still a pretty big issue because we cannot run Mach 4 as the Vigilante. It's just kind of how it works. We've always been this slow. So you do need to make sure your movement is a bit more precise. But luckily there is plenty of time in between to make sure you can actually get through to the end of the level. And also as a weird side note, whenever we shoot as the Vigilante with the shotgun, we also do the regular Vigilante shot. It's super weird, but that's just kind of how this funny stuff works, especially since the Vigilante was never fully implemented anyways. Just like normal, these tanks can pose an issue with damage, but in general, they're not too bad, honestly. Just be kind of careful and you should be fine. And also, as a weird side note, if we are running and we shoot, we also just do the Vigilante's normal shot. There's also that really glitchy ground pound if you do it straight into a dash pad. It's super weird, but it's just kind of funny if you really think about it, honestly. But in general, War isn't all that bad, honestly, but damage is a big concern. However, there are a lot of places where you can get more pizza points, so you should be fine for the most part. Also, right here, instead of whatever the heck I was trying to do, just do a ground pound, because it does give you some vertical height, and you are able to just jump off that cheese block and do a ground pound to get straight on up there. And the only reason we actually needed the gun in the first place is actually this part right here, because we actually can't shoot through there as a Vigilante, like most blocks that are straight under us. But in general, this level isn't all that bad, but it is definitely pretty difficult in terms of not taking damage and being careful about your health. But otherwise, with that all out of the way, let's move on to Pizza Face. However, before we are actually able to make it to Pizza Face, we actually need to do a lot of uppercut shots. I wasn't actually able to pull this off, but I almost nearly did actually do it. It's very, very difficult to do so, and I didn't want to waste a bunch of time just trying to get this one trick down, but I got really, really close, like right here. But otherwise, yeah, with that all the way, let's actually finally get to Pizza Face. Now, for Pizza Face, what you want to do is you want to make sure you perform the grab glitch on all the enemies you can, and then just throw them at Pizza Face like you normally would. Now, the Vigilante, he's kind of finicky sometimes when he's trying to do the grab glitch, but generally all you have to do is you just gotta shoot once in the air and then quickly shoot again, and then you'll end up going into a grab instead. In general, it's easier to get the enemies when you're going up from them and like staying above them, but in general, it's not too bad honestly to pull it off. But it's still very difficult, because here's the thing, you can only have 4 hits as I've said before, and you cannot regenerate them at all, and that has always been an issue in the boss fights, but it's especially an issue in this one because of how long it is. But in general, it's not too bad so long as you're good at the fight. But in general, most people aren't really good at this fight. Fortunately enough, however, if there's a bunch of enemies on the field and you want to get rid of them, all you have to do is just get on one side of the field and shoot them all down. In general, it's not too bad, but the second phase does get a little bit better for us, surprisingly enough, at least in my opinion. Now, for the second phase, what you want to do is you want to do the grab glitch into the gun, immediately hold it, and make sure not to ever let go until the end of the phase, because here's the thing, you'll just spaz out completely as you do in the Vigilante fight. So in general, the same principles apply, but in general, I find this fight a little bit easier than the Vigilante, at least in my opinion. I've practiced Pizza Face quite a few times before, so in general, I've gotten used to his attack patterns, surprisingly enough. It's still not easy, mind you, but it's not too bad. Just be extra careful about each of the attacks and try to just stay in the middle, if I'm being honest, and you should be a-okay for the most part, because that's just kind of how it works. Anyways, for the third phase, the bosses are a little bit easier than they would be when you originally fought them, especially Fake Peppino, because he does not have anything to his advantage for the most part, luckily enough. But Pepperman here, he is just very, very easy as always. There's no issues at all. Just do what you did in the normal Pepperman fight and you should be a-okay. Well, I guess I've been mentioning that you could do this, but in reality, the mod I'm using actually broke, unfortunately enough, and I haven't found a way to fix it. And that's kind of the whole reason I'm voicing this over in the first place. But anyways, back to the fight. All you gotta do is just do the grab glitch a couple times and you can shoot the Vigilante. Do not throw a piece of dynamite at him, because then he'll just get off the field immediately, and then you won't continue on to the third phase, unfortunately enough, with the noise. In general, just be careful with your dynamite and you should be fine. The other bosses won't have anything happen to them, but the Vigilante will just straight up disappear, unfortunately enough. And the noise, he is way easier to dodge than he normally would be, because he's just kind of doing the same thing, and you can just kind of repeat the same easy attacks if you're lucky enough. There's really not much to say about the noise, honestly, but it's not too bad, honestly. Just keep your distance as you always would, and you should be a-okay. And the only attack I'd even think is remotely difficult right here would probably be the pogo attack. And for Fake Peppino isn't that bad either, honestly. Just be kind of careful with his rabbit attack, because that can be a little bit annoying sometimes. And for the jump attack, just kind of do the same thing where you ground pound on top of him after he's done with his attack. Rinse and repeat that cycle and you should be good to go for the most part. And yeah, that's kind of how it works for this fight. So anyways, let's get on to Pizza Face himself. And honestly, Pizza Face really isn't that difficult, all things aside. Just keep your distance from him for the most part and he really won't do that much. And the only attack that actually is any amount of dangerous is his Fly Swatter attack. And I'm genuinely serious about that. Sure, he could do the stomp attack, and if you're on the ground it could cause an issue, but just keep jumping when he's doing that attack and you should be fine, honestly. There really aren't any issues in these boss fights, honestly. It's nothing you really haven't done before, except for the first and second phases of boss fights, I suppose. So yeah, with that out of the way, I don't have much else to say for this boss fight, so enjoy the rest of it, I suppose. Anyways, on to the Crumbling Tower Pizza. And just like it normally is, the Crumbling Tower Pizza honestly isn't that difficult, all things aside. There really isn't that many places where you can actually mess up or take too much damage. And in fact, there are some funny skips you can do, like for example, you can just straight up skip the gun up there, because you actually don't need that gun in particular, because you don't actually have to shoot under yourself, fortunately enough. It's always kind of nice when you can skip that kind of thing. And the Vigilante can rely on his one true gun that he's relied on for this entire run, honestly. And for those of you wondering, yes, I did actually save Snotty. After all, the Vigilante is a cheese slime. I don't know why he would kill Snotty exactly. Unless Snotty is actually just a piece of snot. Which in that case, I don't know what the Vigilante would think about that. But the Snotty is safe anyways, so it doesn't really matter, honestly. You can also just skip that weenie mount right there, even though it would technically be faster to go on top of it, by just blowing up these rats. But the Vigilante is only needed to rely on himself and Gustavo for like a couple of top-ins, but we don't talk about that, honestly. And our last and final challenge in this entire run, that's actually any amount of difficult, is this golf cart, and all we really have to do is just bounce on it a bunch of times. Also forgot to mention that, in fact, you can just shoot it and you can get your combo back, which is kind of weird, but that's just kind of how it works. But with that all done and out of the way, I hope you enjoyed this video, honestly. The challenge was honestly pretty fun, and it felt like playing the game for the first time again, because the controls were all new and it just felt completely awesome, honestly. The feeling of beating Pizza Face for the first time as the Vigilante was honestly unreal. But with that all done and out of the way, if you've enjoyed, consider leaving a like or maybe even subscribing. And I hope to see you all in the next one. Goodbye!